Good morning and welcome to Wake Up. It's our 100th edition. Let's go!
Wake up, all you need to know. You can find it here at the Sonia Poulton Show. Giving you the lowdown where others will not go. Wake up to the Sonia Poulton Show.
And good morning to you all. Wake up with Sonia Poulton and guests. We've hit the 100 mark. Yes, indeed we have. Thank you all for being here and growing in our numbers week on week. I am so grateful to you all. Thank you. I truly appreciate it. You're all so busy in the comments already, and I love you guys. I love you all so much. What's on Wake Up today? Author and cancelled academic David Hughes. He'll be drilling down on his investigation into what really happened at the Manchester Arena bombing attack. And I'll also be joined by the British Hindu, Satish Sharma, and he's going to be talking to us about the UK's failure to tackle grooming gangs. Plus, the UK must extradite Andrew Tate. So say some of the people who are suing him in the British High Court. And doubling down, the BBC protects its paedo statue. Of course it does. And more, repeal the coronavirus laws. Prince, I went down a rabbit hole this week. Oh my days, I went down a rabbit hole. You know how you have a thought and then it leads you to another thought. And before you know it, you're like, in deep. That's where I was, and that was to do with Prince. Yes, indeed. Good morning, Grand Rising, and our mods are in attendance. Please say hello to them all. Lovely to have you here with us. And I don't know about you, but I was so sick this week of all the kind of really overly dreamy, romanticized idea of Charles and Camilla, and all legacy media have been going on about how they've been navigating their 50-year love affair. Yeah, well, part of that was at the expense of Diana, actually. And I really hate the way legacy media romanticizes the royals. It's a completely unrealistic viewpoint of who they are and what they're about. The pair of them, put Diana through absolute hell. I'm in no doubt about that whatsoever. So I'm not going to take part in their romanticizing nonsense. No, I am not. How are you all? I hope you're well. And hello to Sophie. Sophie, I saw your comment on Wednesday in the live chat. You said, Sonia, I have a quick question. Would you ever consider doing an Ask Me Anything live special on YouTube where we can ask your opinion on things we've always been dying to ask you? It'd be a dream. Yes, Sophie, I can do that. The only thing I wouldn't be able to talk about would be my present legal situation because it's live, but I'd be prepared to answer anything else. So yeah, let's get that organized. Let's get it organized. I apologize. Teresa's only just having her breakfast. She said, please don't make me sick by talking about the royals. I hear you, sister. I hear you loud and clear. Right, let's dig in. Okay, so the BBC have just spent £500,000 protecting their nonce statue. Now, this is the front of BBC Broadcasting House. This is their nonce statue. I'm sure many of you are sadly familiar with it. It was sculpted in the 1930s by Eric Gill. Here he is, sculpting away. It depicts Prospero and Ariel from William Shakespeare's The Tempest. It is said to be a symbolism for broadcasting, but it looks more like a nonce than a kid to me. This is a deeply controversial sculpture, as I say, outside the BBC's London headquarters. And it was damaged, then restored, and now put back on display, but behind a screen. Look at this. Check this out. Look at that. And this screen literally tells us now that this image, this statue is of great concern to the BBC, and they will protect it no matter what. This statue represents so much that is wrong. Its creator, Eric Gill, abused his own children, raped his sisters and the family dog, and goodness knows who and what else, and confessed much of it in his diaries, which were found after his death. As I say, the statue was recently damaged in 2022, and people have for years been pleading with the BBC to do the right thing and take the statue down. They have always refused. It was commissioned by then Director General Sir John Reith in the 1930s, though no one seems to know exactly why Reith chose it. Perhaps he was a pervert. It would be on message for the BBC. A BBC spokesman said regarding the restoration of the statue and the new protective shield, Broadcasting House is a building of historical and cultural significance and has been so for almost a century. The sculpture of Ariel and Prospero, depicted as symbols of broadcasting, is an integral part of it. The BBC in no way condones Gill's abusive behaviour, but it draws a line between the actions of Gill and the status of these artworks. So what they're saying is you cannot confuse the two, that the artist and the art he creates are two different things. Absolute hogwash. He created this image, and the little boy, it was actually based, as I say, on Shakespeare's The Tempest. But what he did was he made sure to elongate the penis of the little boy because he was a pervert. We can absolutely, on this occasion, separate the art from the artist. No, we can't. Don't separate the art from the artist, right? Don't separate it. And so anyway, the BBC goes on to say, when the building was subject to serious criminal damage on 2 occasions, there was no easy option for addressing the destruction caused. Having sought expert advice and opinion, we repaired the facade in line with the building's grade 2 plus status. They worked with Historic England, they worked with Westminster Council. So when we say that the BBC has spent £500,000, you know they haven't, right? You know that they've spent your money, be that a licence fee payer, a taxpayer. They spent your money, my money. They've spent our money. People need to see this as a serious message from the BBC. Make no mistake, this is a big up yours to public opinion, to activists, to campaigners, to survivors of BBC abuse, to survivors of childhood abuse, to animals. You name it, has long been a source of deep upset because the BBC has become known as a place of institutional child abuse that has put its stars above and beyond any safeguarding or compassion for children and young people. Think of some of the filth that has been elevated to great heights at the BBC. Let me just show you this image. Jimmy Savile, of course, Stuart Hall, Hugh Edwards. And what about this one? Gary Glitter, even on the front cover of a BBC magazine for children, right? They love their abusers, they do at BBC. And as anti-child abuse campaigner Sunny Clarabelle on X said to me yesterday, Jimmy Savile is laughing from his place in hell at what they've done with this statue. And BBC really couldn't afford to do this. They really couldn't, not after the Hugh Edwards scandal last year, right? Where their huge news star was found to be in possession of child abuse images, having previously paid a 17-year-old crack addict to send compromising nude pictures in exchange for over £30,000. So what do I think it means for them to have done this? It has absolutely nothing to do with historic significance. The BBC would bulldoze it down instantly if it was an image of a slave owner. No, this is a BBC preference, and people need to know that while it remains in place, protected from those who would do it harm. The message is loud and clear. Enter here at your own risk, especially if you are a child. The BBC stands as a national emblem to a nation that does not take child abuse seriously, so much so that the national broadcaster can rejoice in a sick abuser. Oh, and by the way, I absolutely loathe the sneering attitude of hacks, including at The Guardian, right? They do that whole, we should separate art from the action. No, this is bigger than that. And The Guardian actually wrote this week, as well as the abuse of his daughters, this is about Gill, obviously, they also documented sexual activity with the family dog. His statues, particularly his broadcasting housework, have become a focus of attention for the hard right, including Tommy Robinson and the conspiracy group QAnon. Shut up, sit down. You hacks make me absolutely sick, you enablers of abuse. I've been shouting about this statue for well over a decade, well before Tommy Robinson, well before QAnon, and many of us have. I originally come from the left, and I know a nonce is a nonce, an abuser is an abuser, and the BBC have just said the biggest up yours to child abuse victims. That is the reality. I have to agree with Dino Novicello, who is currently involved in representing an anonymous client against Dan Wootton in the High Court. Dino believes that all statues relating to child abusers should be removed, and he includes Eric Gill's statue in it as well. He talks about how the sculpture has recently been restored, and he said, although the method may have been wrong, the reasoning behind the vandalism was justified. I have said it numerous times before, and I will say it again. In my opinion, as a lawyer who represents victims and survivors of child abuse, this sculpture should be removed. I've talked with Dino about this and more, and I agree with him 100%, but the BBC is deliberately deaf to it. It's almost like the statue has been given even more untouchable status, out of reach of us mere mortals. The BBC praises predators, and that's as true today as it was in the 1930s. So I have a plan. If the BBC aren't going to listen to us, let us stage our own protest. And this is what I plan to do. It's a new campaign, our campaign at Wake Up, right? If they won't ban the statue, let's fight to ban the font designed by the predator himself. It is this one. It is the Gill Sans. And just simply don't use it. Don't use it. Let it die out like him. And producers of this font, stop manufacturing it. Stop producing it. If the BBC refused to stand up for children, for animals and people in society, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't. Do everything you can to tell other people, do not use this font. Don't use it yourself. Let it die out, just like the man himself. That's what I say. F the font, says Queen of Cosmic. Yes. Well, Charlotte, he designed it. He designed that font. That's what he did. And I mean, actually, he was actually a very talented individual, but he was also a horrible, horrible abuser and predator. And I just think that we have to draw the line. We've made too many excuses for a very long time. We're like, oh, they're an artist. They're allowed to behave that way. No, stop using it, please. Just stop using it. We say don't remove history statues. Wait, what's that? And therefore forget history. Oh, you are swapping it for Cosmic Sans. I like that. Yeah, I'm generally, the problem is that the BBC really can't afford to have that. They cannot afford to have that because it still continues to send the message that child abusers rule around here, say the BBC. Right. Dad said, this is why I have never had a BBC license in 35 plus years. Yes, Claire, this protection cost £500,000. That's what it cost. Insane, right? Absolutely insane. Okay, moving on. The Trump tariff U-turn is very interesting, right? Trump has paused his controversial tariff for 90 days. But is this the art of the deal or the art of the spiel? Some in mainstream media say it's America's biggest U-turn ever, which has dumped on pensioners with their lifetime of savings, while others say the president is manipulating the market. But that's okay because some people will benefit. He was in the White House the other day and he pointed at presumably two very, very wealthy men, and he talked about how his reversal had made them increasingly rich, right? And it can also make other people rich if they had followed his advice. But I'm not sure if he's a president at this stage. He sounds more to me like a market trader. And but the reality is that Trump and his billionaire mates are gambling with the jobs and pensions of blue collar workers. That is the reality. That is also what's happening. So we shall see. We shall see. But what a quick, swift turnaround. I mean, some of the headlines been absolutely astonishing. Apocalyptic warning about economic meltdown. Is it really, though? Has it really been that? Let me know what you think. And I have to say that I am actually delighted to see that the era of the fraudulent MAGA influencer is over. And it only took 3 months of Trump being in office to expose them. I'm sure he didn't mean to, but the problem is he and his administration have done all these things that they said they wouldn't do, like allowing Elon Musk's business interests to conflict with government and people's interests, and haven't done the things they said they would do, like releasing files. And the MAGA influencers have been forced to go back and forward to accommodate this. So one minute they are saying never ever buy electric vehicles, they are part of an agenda and they are rubbish, and the next they are making posts on social media telling people Tesla electric cars are the best. It gives me great pleasure to see the awful MAGA influencer period coming to a close. How these people have managed to infiltrate the truth with their bought and paid for content could only have happened on a social media platform that is owned by Amarga man, Elon Musk. That's the only way it really could have happened. They have been fed lines to fulfill agendas that are not for the people, but they are now getting busted. Blame any number of recent things for these key moments. The release of the JFK files, and Israel, the PR photo shoots around the release of the so-called Epstein files was just grotesque. Remember, we're talking about abuse here, and they were all posing as if they were stars. Anyway, they're getting busted now, and that includes the top-tier influencers like Benny Johnson and Russell Brand. The grift is over, kids. Oh, yes, it is. We've seen you are merely hired hands, infiltrators of truth movements worldwide, but you are establishment lackeys. It's over. And not before time. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah. And people keep saying, read between the lines on what Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Health Secretary, is saying. And they say, look, just read between the lines. Yes, we appreciate that he came out again and said, I'm going to quote him directly so that we can have no doubt about it. This was said on April the 9th. So this was Wednesday, but I actually think it was recorded on Tuesday. It came out on CBS News. The federal government's position, my position, is that people should get the measles vaccine. This is a complete reverse ferret from his previous position, right? And it troubles me. And right now, there will be terrified parents who have to make a choice. And that's what he said. And so that's what they will do. He could have done so much about MMR in one fell swoop. There is no long game for me when it comes to MMR. I've been standing up against it for almost 30 years and will continue to do so. The only way I would make the statement that Kennedy did is if I were being blackmailed and my life or the lives of my loved ones were threatened. Maybe he is. Maybe Candace Owens is right. But there was a video that was put out yesterday, and this was them at a presidential meeting. And check it out. Check out what he has to say.
We have now, the autism rates have gone from now most recent numbers we think are going to be about 1 in 31, 1 in 12, so they're going up again from 1 in 10,000 when I was a kid. And we are going, at your direction, we are going to know by September. We've launched a massive testing and research effort that's going to involve hundreds of scientists from around the world. By September, we will know what has caused the autism epidemic, and we'll be able to eliminate those exposures.
So big. Think of that. So it was 1 in 10,000 children had autism, and now it's 1 in 31. Not 31,000, 31. That's a horrible statistic, isn't it? And there's got to be something artificial out there that's doing this. So you think you're going to have a pretty good idea, huh?
We will know by September.
There will be no bigger news conference than that. So that's it. If you can come up with that answer where you stop taking something, you stop eating something, or maybe it's a shot, but something's causing it. It can't be from 10,000 to. Can you imagine that, Marco? That's a big number. Thank you very much. You're doing great. Thank you, Bobby.
And that would be absolutely great if it was true. Now, can I trust him? No, I'm not an enabler. I'm not one of the people who is close to him and feels the need to keep explaining what he is doing. It's like, oh, this is 33-degree chess. Or whatever else his enablers want to say he's doing. Actions speak louder than words, right? And at this moment in time, he's all mouth, has shown to be quite dangerous action, frankly, and I'll not hold my breath till September. But in the event that they manage to do this, this would be a game changer, obviously, absolutely. What were the statistics they quoted? They said that previously it was 1 in 10,000 and now it's 1 in 31. I'm only surprised they didn't say 1 in 33. And wait, what? Oh, I got you. And so we shall see. We shall see. I'm disturbed. I understand people like Del Bigtree as one example, who is heavily invested in RFK Jr. in a way that I'm not, has a much more kind of wait and see attitude than I do about this. I watched a clip from Del and I agree with him that RFK is dealing with a massive situation that has taken years to take root and it can't be dismantled all at once. I get that. I absolutely get that. I agree with him that it's an entire diseased system. And it nearly broke my heart to then hear him say, for those of you who want this changed overnight, I get it. Children will probably die today for products that are on the market that shouldn't be there. So even some of the greatest supporters of RFK Jr. are forced to admit that his statements this week and last week are deeply, deeply problematic. You can't undo that. You can't undo that kind of statement. It's done now. So I shall just sit and wait. But I'm not going to be persuaded by, people like the Children's Health Defence who like, our mission hasn't changed, and then they're like, read between the lines. Terrified parents who need to make a decision do not have time to read between the lines. They need somebody to stand up and be counted like they did before they got into the administration, right? So we shall see. We shall see. Big Pharma will pay RFK off. Good morning, hoax. How are you? So we shall see. September, is it? I mean, we've been told repeatedly, haven't we? This is coming. This is coming. Oh, on the first day I'm in office, I'm closing down the Hoover building. Sure you are, Kash Patel. Sure you are. Did it, Kath? I'm very sorry to hear that, my love. Very sorry indeed. And good morning to David Nolan from Stop Common Pass, who is on his Repeal the Coronavirus Act jaunt, and more power to his elbow. David never forgets this. Stop Common Pass were the organization during C-19 who were fighting against huge, massive totalitarian measures, a proper grassroots organization, not one that's been formed off Whitehall, but a proper grassroots organization. And what David will be joining us, maybe even next week, to talk about how temporary measures should not outlast their need. He says the CPS must stop pursuing Britons for lockdown fines. We must begin a national conversation on repealing coronavirus legislation from the UK statute book. Can you believe that? Wasn't it? It was literally supposed to be temporary measures, and 5 years later, they're still all over it. Still all over it, kids. Shocking stuff. Shocking stuff. Right. I see that Burger King, glorious Burger King, are giving vouchers to Israeli soldiers. And that has, of course, prompted a boycott. Burger King have announced a plan to distribute $128,000 in vouchers to Israeli soldiers. This decision has sparked, as you can imagine, a significant backlash, because what about the starving people in Palestine whose supplies are routinely cut off? But you go ahead, Burger King. You support the oppressor. You support genocide. The last time I ate at Burger King, apart from the fact that I don't eat meat anymore, but the last time I actually ate at Burger King, I'm not joking, I got food poisoning. And it was weird because it was probably about, how long ago was it now? Maybe it might even have been 10 years ago. And my daughter and I, we were still living in the Cotswolds. Also, that can't have been, got to be longer. We still live in the Cotswolds before we moved back to London. And we'd been to visit friends in London. We stopped in the motorway cafe on the way back, went into Burger King, and my daughter refused to eat the meal before her. She was like, no, Mum, it smells funny. I ate it. I got food poisoning. Burger King. And also M&M, first time in Israel on the 1st of June, right? What? M&M? I really literally thought you were more awake to this, but they cannot resist that money, can they? They cannot resist that money. I hate it all. No, I don't. I don't hate it all. And what else shall I tell you about before I bring in our first guest? There's so much to talk about today. I don't even know where to start, really, but I'll start somewhere. I wonder if I've got time for, no, I haven't got time for that. I'll do that later. Actually, our first guest is just joining, so we'll bring him in ASAP because it's a really important conversation. And so avoid Burger King. Avoid Burger King. Right, let me have a drink before I bring in our guest. John said McDonald's gave my big brother E. coli, which he passed to me when I was 2. I got a secondary virus, kidney failure, and cardiac arrested twice. I've had to have regular kidney checkups since. What? No. Teresa's cat turned her face away from Whisker's meaty mix. Good shout. Jenny says, I think this is a fair question. Jenny said, are you actually eating beef in these places? I'm not so sure. Peter avoids all fast food joints. Excellent. Kids, can you believe that we've reached 100? How astonishing is that? When we started last May, it was last May, because I just had my final fling of working for other people, working for other companies. I just left TNT, Today's News Talk, and because obviously they were trying to censor me repeatedly, even though they're supposed to be a free speech station. And I set up Wake Up because I just had enough of working for other people and their various demands. And we've literally grown week on week, and I love you all for it. Thank you so much. Please keep subscribing and sharing and liking and being here with us. Thank you. Charlotte, are you calling them? Is that what you're calling TNT? Charlotte was my producer at TNT. She was the best thing about TNT. Other than me, of course. We were both the best things. Right. Let us thank you, London Lady. And yes, Marcuson. Marcuson, by the way, that bloopers, right? I was thinking about playing it today, and I watched it again yesterday. And I feel that 4 minutes of my bloopers, a bit too much for anybody, but it was funny. I mean, you've edited it brilliantly. You absolutely have. But I just thought, oh, we might need to do an edited version of that. But if once we get to 100K subs, maybe we will do it. Right. Yes, bye, Carol. Take good care of yourself, darling. And what's that? Play it. Play what? Oh, Jackie. Oh, it is actually really funny and it's brilliantly produced, but 4 minutes of watching yourself in bloopers is a bit too much. So I might just be a little bit biased. Who knows? Who knows? And let us bring in our first guest. Really important. Let's do it. Here he is. Good morning. I think we've got a mic. There we go. Good morning to you, Satish. How are you?
Well, Scott, I'm very well indeed, and delighted to be a part of the show today. I've been admiring you from a safe distance for quite some time.
Oh,
but
bless you.
There were so many times when I thought that was wonderfully put, and so great to be on board. And thank you so much for the chance to share some thoughts.
Not at all. Thank you for being here. You are, of course, an author. You're a pundit, Satish Sharma, aka the British Hindu. And you know a great deal and are passionate as I am about the problems of child abuse in this country, all over the world. And there's a number of things that I'd like to discuss with you today. And one of them, of course, is the whole issue of grooming gangs. It's kicked off again before Parliament went into recess this week. Jess Phillips gave a speech, and it was very much about the big picture to do with child abuse. And there is very much a sense that Labour are very keen to get away from narrowing it down to grooming gangs. What are your thoughts about this, Satish?
Oh dear, this is a long-running issue. I first encountered this phenomenon with Anne Cryer many decades ago, almost I think probably 30 years ago. Anne Cryer was mentioning that there was a problem. It had an identifiable set of characteristics. And she was a wonderful, wonderful lady. She put it across in the most gentlest of language, but it was inescapable that the manner in which the young daughters of her constituents who were being targeted was systemic. It was also systematic. There was a process that was underway. And it came to one logical conclusion, and that was that the young ladies and daughters of her constituency were being targeted because of religious and racial hatred. There was a contempt for these young girls and the society that they were a part of, which was unavoidable. I've always had a simple philosophy that either we use statistics for everything or we use statistics for nothing. You can't have it selectively sort of applied. And the statistics are very clear. Similarly, you use reasoning for everything. You can't one day come to a choice and say, well, I'm going to abandon reasoning and just do this on a completely different thing. Reasoning is something we rely on all the time, or we don't rely on it at all. These are fundamentals. And her reasoning, coupled with her statistics, made it really clear that this was a very particular type of assault on what I think is the capacity of this society to reproduce itself and have future generations. Anybody who's a historian and has studied these things will come across the phenomenon where rape has been used as an act of war, as an act of invasion. And in history, we've never really paid too much attention to what the perpetrators of this violence actually said. We've paid attention to what they did. And in this country, we have a remarkable scenario where what they have done, statistically proven, what reason has led us to conclude, is being discarded because of narrative and rhetoric. And it's being discarded by people who are masters in communication. You know,
Right.
Satish Sharma is a barrister. He has been trained in nuance, in dissecting arguments, in trying to look through the web and the fog of verbs and words and so on to what's really going on. And yet it's not being applied in this particular case. So I think the situation we have is that those who we rely on to protect the most vulnerable members of our society have reneged on that responsibility. They have abandoned their duty of protection. And that in past, in history, that has always led to one next step, which is civil disorder. And
Exactly.
it's a worry.
Exactly. And that's where we've been. And people have obviously been heavily penalized for that, locked up. You talk about how our institutions and the people within them are not only enabling abuse, but they're trying to manufacture abuse. And the example I use is I heard you in an interview where you were talking about they had come to you from the child abuse inquiry and they had asked you about abuse within British Hinduism, right? Explain what happened.
So this is going back to ICSA, as it's now called. At that time, I'd been serving as one of the trustees of one of our oldest British Hindu charities, the National Council of Hindu Temples. And so I was in daily contact with most of the voices of our community, but also directly in contact with the temples up and down the country, of which there are over 300. And so it was in that capacity that I received a communication. And it was a standard sort of a template that's produced in public inquiries. And I read through, and it struck me as a little bit odd that there was, like I've said, an identifiable phenomenon. You know, we have, if I can use a Harry Potter analogy, you know, we have a Voldemort in our community, and, you know, one mustn't say the name, you know.
Well, we do around here. So what or whom is the Voldemort?
Okay, well, it's in this particular case, it is predominantly the Pakistani Muslim community. It is men of that community who have been engaging in an activity which is contrary to the human rights of those young girls and is in breach of every law that this nation has worked hard to create and to establish. So it's criminal, both at a human rights level, but also at a at a civil and criminal rights level. And it struck me that this was a little bit of a fishing expedition. So I went through it a little bit more in detail. I contacted the temples and asked the question, has anybody ever had a case where a priest in one of our religious institutions has been found guilty of performing such breaches and criminal acts? And is there any systemic evidence that this is occurring in our community? And the answer was a resounding no. I think there was one case out of some 40 years of temples and across the whole of the country where an allegation had been made and then it was dropped. So it was clear that this wasn't systemic. And
Right.
what really worried me was that was this an attempt to draw false equivalences, to make the statement that actually this happens in all communities, this happens in all religions, this happens in all traditions. And so I contacted them and I asked them the question. I said, I'm sorry, have you got any evidence
Right.
of such a phenomenon occurring? And if you haven't, then I feel very uncomfortable that this is being put forward to us. If you had criminal records, the police were saying here are cases where this is happening, then it warrants investigation. But otherwise, it struck me as being an inquiry which did not have integrity. And so
Oh,
when I
that's
responded
such
to them, I said, "I'm
such a
sorry, I
pity
don't."
to hear that, isn't it? It is
Yeah,
because we all wanted so much. We obviously saw lots of problems with the formation of the inquiry. They kept removing chairs, not least because the chairpersons that they kept selecting were actually associated with the politicians who were going to be under review. So it was already problematic from the start. A huge amount of money. There were problems with barristers. Barristers were even being accused of inappropriate sexual behaviour at the child abuse inquiry. All of these things were happening. So they were trying to, as you say, create this false equivalence. And they came to you, right? Because you're not white. That's why they did that, isn't it? Is that right? Do you think that's right?
it's really strange. I am what is categorized as BAME, and which actually means it's an anachronism for not white. If you're BAME, it's a really nice, politically correct way of saying not white.
Hate
Um,
that. I hate that expression. As the mother of a mixed race child, I absolutely hate that expression. It's just, it's horrible. It's dehumanizing. It's awful. I mean, we are what we are, right? Right. And I absolutely embrace all people as much as I humanly can, except those who want to do harm. If you're on the same page as me and you want to make society a better society, I am with you. Absolutely 100%. But I'm also aware that there is clearly a problem here regarding the issue of grooming gangs and the fact that the government don't seem to want to address it. Now, is that because they may be found to be complicit? Is that a possibility?
Sonia, I think there is a need for us to dig a little bit deeper.
Go
There
for
are
it.
some assumptions. There are some assumptions which we have all accepted, and I think they really warrant re-scrutinizing now. One is that the British state acts in the interests of the English, Welsh, Irish, and Scottish. And when I scrutinize that again with statistics and with the capacity of reason, I can't find the evidence to support it. For far too long, we have had too many instances where those who are the citizens of this country seem to be at the end of a very, very long line, and there are an awful lot of people who are being put, shall we say, further ahead of that line in terms of having their needs and wants met. And so whenever we say we and our institutions, it always sort of a little bulb lights up in my head, and I say, well, hang on, are they really our institutions?
Right, right.
I don't think they are. I've drawn the distinction between the British identity and the indigenous identities. It's worth reflecting upon whether the British identity is an indigenous identity or whether it's an artifice, something fabricated and created by people who are not of these islands and who built these institutions on the strength of violence. I was with an American friend at Windsor Castle the other day, and I was just observing how many visitors were going to the castle. And we think of it as one of our institutions, don't we? And
Right,
yet it was built by William the Conqueror. Who did he conquer? You know, he
right,
built it not to protect the people of these islands, but as a place where he could inflict violence and then retreat behind sort of 20-foot thick walls in safety.
right.
And
You're
I think
absolutely
there's
right.
much to be drawn. I think there's much to be drawn from that. And the British identity actually is totally different to the indigenous identities. Those who live outside of these islands have encountered the British identity, and it's not one which is received with warmth and,
No.
um, shall we say, embraced as the natural repository of all of human wisdom, kindness, and the milk of love and everything else. And the people of these islands, I think, have been taught and given a narrative which is really worth revisiting.
Go on. What is that narrative?
Okay, so where should we start? Let's have a look. So, from outside of the walls of this island, we have a whole world upon which they said the sun never set upon the British Empire. And it was the British Empire which sent its worst people to every corner of the world. Remember Sir Walter Raleigh and Drake, they were given charters by the ruling royal families that you are hereby authorized to go out to rape, pillage, kill, commit whatever atrocities, so long as we get our cut. and the modern navy was built on giving the old pirates, who then became privateers. A new term was created for them. Private enterprise was created for them, and it was on the basis of projecting violence. And that violence is really what established the might of the people who then came back to this island, a long way away from the rest of the world, and they established their rule here.
Right.
One thing is really clear when you study history: they did not share their ill-gotten gains
No.
with the natives of this island. They created tax havens, I suppose, where you could conceal an obscene amount of wealth away from the scrutiny of the people of these islands and enjoy the benefits of it. I was doing some research about the benefits to the indigenous people of this island, and there was one statement where a law had been changed, which basically said children under the age of 10 are no longer required to work in the workhouse for 10 hours a day. It's reduced to 8 hours a day.
Oh,
Okay, so that's probably the sort of extent to which they
shocking
looked upon the.
history.
It is. It's
It is.
an
We shoved
extraordinary.
children up chimneys, for goodness sake. We did some terrible, terrible things. But here's the thing. I've never been particularly.
Sonia, if I
Yes.
can just jump in, I'm a stickler for, shall we say, precision. When you say we did some terrible things, no,
Okay.
we did not do terrible things. The English, the Irish, the Scottish, and the Welsh did not do terrible things. There were people who were obviously co-opted from all of those communities, trained to become soldiers, and then shipped out across the world. But the benefit never accrued to their families and the children. Otherwise, the people of these islands would be living in luxury and
Fact.
comfort, which
Fact.
would be the envy of kings of old.
Yes. I mean, absolutely. I agree with you. I really do. What I don't like is where we've reached now. Obviously, a lot of what you're describing there from a very long time ago is still prevalent now. We know that extremely rich, they squirrel away their riches. The majority of us are left kind of like to fight amongst ourselves. We become increasingly divisive. And I think that you can offer a really interesting perspective, because I believe it is possible that we can all live together in harmony, but we have to be able to name what is wrong and rotten, which is what you're prepared to do. Absolutely. Talk to me about the right and left wing dichotomy that we're dealing with. You said to me it's obsolete. What do you mean by that?
So the origins of that categorization are actually France, where after the French Revolution, on the right side of the hall, where the landed gentry and the people in positions of wealth and power used to sit, that was where the old world, where the people with the white wigs and wearing perfumes and silks used to sit. And on the left-hand side of this hall was where the common people used to sit. And that's really where the right and the left came from. At that moment in time, it was a distinction that could be easily seen. But it's too easy to divide people with an identity marker and then encourage them to note each other's differences and then to blame the group which is weaker. To blame all of the ills which are afflicting the group which is weaker on those who are stronger, if that's what you want to do. This is classic divide and rule. The Romans did it, and Lord Elphinstone stood up in Parliament when he was talking about ruling in India. And he said, divide and rule worked for the Romans and it will work for us in India. So all you need to do is create that division. And by and large, the majority of people are born innately good. Our Hindu position is that for a spirit to be incarnate as a human being is a journey where that spirit has occupied many, many bodies and eventually becomes this incredible incarnation of divinity. And so the spirit inside is what we look at. And so the spirit is equal in everybody. This sort of stuff is merely a garment. It's clothing that we occupy for a period of time. And it's because of this approach and this philosophy that ancient India, it welcomed the Jews when they were fleeing after the demolition of their first temple. So we have Jewish communities settled in India. It welcomed the Parsis, the Persians, when they were fleeing Islamic terrorism way back in the early dawn of history. It welcomed the first Islamic the Sufis and people who are fleeing from Islamic terrorism as well. So India has a history of welcoming people because we see them as human beings on this journey. And some of us are confused, and some of us are emotionally a little bit immature, and some of us have not had the opportunity to develop a spiritual side. But each and every one is a droplet of divinity inside a human body. And that's the perspective with which we look at things. And so when we look at what's happening here, what we are seeing is a deliberate attempt now to create those divisions. When
Yes.
Keir Starmer stood up after Southport and immediately said that the far right is what we have to be worried about, that was classic divide and rule strategy. And we all felt it viscerally, didn't we? I think those who are in the Bain group, we had a strange sort of sensation that, hang on a moment, we're the ones who are supposed to be fearful of this alleged far right. And yet we're not worried about, where are these people from the far right? We're not
Right.
seeing them.
Right.
And I've been here 60 years, so I remember the skinheads and the mods and the rockers
Oh,
and
yeah,
real
you know.
racism, real far right. We would recognize it. And
Yeah.
so for Sakir to stand up and appropriate our concerns and then use them in some sort of a manner to divide the people of these islands, it felt really, really fundamentally wrong.
Like an
And
attack.
I can't see that it was accidental. A person with his training, with his background, and with his knowledge of law would never have made such a faux pas accidentally.
Right. But he continued. He doubled down on it, didn't he? He kept repeating it. So you're absolutely right. I don't believe it was accidental either. It was very much a tar and feathering of people to silence people, the continuation of what's going on now with the whole idea of the grooming gangs. And then you have people like Rupert Lowe who have raised this incredible amount of money, over $500,000, to do his own kind of independent inquiry into grooming gangs. Well, that, of course, will be problematic because it's not backed by the state. So you won't be able to force people to either give evidence or appear. But do you think that would be of any use to us? Because is this something that we do need to tackle? Is this a blot in our history, a stain on our society that needs to be uncovered, or has it been blown out of proportion?
So I'm an absolutist when it comes to freedom of speech. Um, I think it's impossible for somebody to offend me because that power resides within me. And we teach that the power to offend somebody is dependent upon the vulnerability of the person who is being offended and their capacity to be triggered. In the olden days, this used to be what we called growing up, wasn't it? Sticks and stones and all of those little rhymes that we grew up with. But this issue, we must not feel guilty about a
Mm,
crime that we have committed.
mhm.
And so we must not appropriate the guilt and say, yes, group guilt exists. And because it was a member of my tribe, I too am guilty, and so I should be diminished.
Right.
We are each and every one of us autonomous beings, and we should be held accountable for our individual actions and statements. And so the British authorities are very keen at this moment to have the English, Irish, Welsh, and Scottish feel guilty. It's very, 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 very strange. Another thing that's worth noting is that this is now 12 years ago. Myself and a group of BAME sort of voices got together and approached the BBC and said there should be a documentary on the
I was
phenomenon
just
of
going
the
to bring you to the
Voldemort
BBC.
well, of the Voldemort community targeting our young daughters. It's identifiable, it's consistent, and it's happening all across the country. And so a journalist, June Kelly, was dispatched, and she came to meet with us. We met in a church in West London, which was a church belonging to the Pakistani Christian community. They hosted the sessions. Lord Singh was there, I was there. There were representatives of pretty much all of the minority communities who are of, shall we say, who have more melanin pigmentation than others. And we spent a whole day being recorded, and we gave them so much evidence. Mohan Singh from the Sikh community was there, and he said, I can give you 900 cases, 90 of which right now have occurred in Slough Oxford and parts of London as well. So the evidence was great. They recorded all of our statements. Lord Singh was extraordinary in his description of what this is Lord Inderjeet Singh and what he was describing. 6 weeks went by, and I sent an email saying, "How's it going?" And I got an email back saying, "Well, we didn't feel the evidence passed a bar of sufficient quality." And so I chased it up and said, "Well, actually, the evidence is irrefutable." And then a response came back saying that it was an editorial decision. We didn't feel that it was the right thing to broadcast just at this moment. More work needs to be done, or something along those lines. And so that was when we realized that institutionally, there are very, very powerful, very wealthy, very rich institutions who do not want this discussed.
Right.
And why would they not want it to be discussed? If you genuinely were in a democracy, by the people, of the people, for the people, then you would want this dealt with. It's the future of this society, the capacity of this society to reproduce more people, to carry on this civilization is under threat. And yet it wasn't.
Our national
present.
broadcaster saw no good reason for it. So you made a film. You absolutely want to defund the BBC, and I completely support you. Tell everybody about the film.
Well, I've actually, my tradition, we're very much part of trying to be part of a solution rather than being a problem. And in that vein, I was talking with the BBC on many occasions. I'd been interviewed where appropriate on a number of occasions. And so I had connections with them. And I put forward to them that on the basis of evidence, we felt they were continuously portraying us as one of two things. One is sort of exotica, so that when you want to show the indigenous people something colorful and strange, then you trot out the Hindus and their Diwali and so on and so forth. And I said, but there is another undercurrent, and that is a continuous subliminal vilifying and defamation of India, Indians, and the Hindu community. And so I presented evidence to them, 8 or 9 cases where they published things on their websites which were factually incorrect. And historically, there's sufficient evidence to prove that they were factually incorrect. And Tim Davie, with all due credit to him, he arranged for me and one of our spiritual practitioners, a lovely white lady who spent a lot of time in India and became deeply steeped in the spiritual traditions and amazingly articulate. And so we had a meeting with the heads of all the departments, the World Service, Radio 4, and so on and so forth, religious commissioners, etc. And I put it across to them that the lens with which they were viewing my community and India and people of Indian origin hadn't changed since the colonial days. They were still looking at us with that funny little lens that it sort of scrutinizes and judges when it hasn't been informed and doesn't understand. And it draws conclusions which are inevitably diminishing. And the BBC knows what nuance is all about. They responded basically refuting the evidence that we'd sent to them and saying that they were deeply considerate, that they had balanced perspectives on everything, even though we said, well, when you go to report on something that's happened in India, you will identify the kinship group, you will identify the village, you will identify the ancestry, and pit 2 members against each other. And yet here in this country, you're saying that the atrocities against young girls are being committed by Asians. You know, this is
Right.
Isn't this
Got you. Yes.
7 billion?
Nuance is important. The thing is, the BBC is absolutely what you were talking about with me yesterday, and that is, you said that, you know, in terms of like the extreme far left, you tick all the identity boxes, and that's where the BBC are coming from, right? Like you say, wheel me out to be something exotic. I don't know about you, Satish, and I'm pretty sure you feel this way. I welcome the day when we no longer care about the color of our skin, but the content of our character, as the great MLK said. But yes, you're absolutely right. As far as the left are concerned, you tick all the boxes, and yet somehow you're not saying what they want to say, Satish. So how does that all pan out?
Yeah, absolutely. It's we're a tradition which believes in merit, that you work hard and you gain You have every right to the benefits that flow from your labor. You're entitled to them, and you're entitled to courtesy and respect on the basis of the hard work you have done and the manner in which you have served your fellow human beings. It doesn't matter what the physical constitution of a person is, it's essentially the character. And you just reminded me on that basis. There was an American philosopher who wrote that the Englishman is the best of all men, whereas the Brit, there are none worse than the British. This
Oh,
is an
it's
American
interesting.
first colonization, so they post their independence. And so they have actually got a really interesting body of literature as a European origin group who were decolonized, who then set up themselves with freedoms and with democracy, with a constitution, with First Amendment rights, all of those things, which were actually in rejection of the manner in which the British establishment ran its society. Many people fled these shores because of the manner in which Parliament behaved. 1776, no taxation without representation was the adage going back, sort of till the end of the 18th century. And it's sad to say, but the deeper, shall we say, momentum, the deeper value system in the depths of the British institution is as determined to dominate and enslave as I think it has ever been. And this is really, I think, coming out now. The British are being seen as people who enslaved and continue to enslave the English, the Irish, the Welsh, and the Scottish.
Right.
Doesn't it feel like we're being increasingly deprived of our rights?
Right, exactly. Maria said, be proud of the skin you're in. And the thing is that I take no pride in the skin that I've been born in, right? I take much more pride in what I've been able to develop about myself, how I've been able to kind of rise out of poverty, for one example, and build a career that is important to me and try and be of service to the world. Those are the things that I take pride in. And I do think that we need to focus more on humanity rather than where we were born, what kind of communities we were born into. I want to get away from all that, Satish. I really do, but I do also understand. I think you're the same.
If I can talk about a lie which is being perpetuated now, and the lie is that only members of your identity group will look after you. This is not true.
Right? No.
I'm more than happy to have a person of your character entrusted with my rights, and I hope that you will be willing to say the same. And so this notion that West Yorkshire Police have said that we can't have white people recruited onto our police force is an incredibly inhuman notion. It is saying that in order to protect the rights of a particular group, white men cannot be entrusted to be of sufficient judgment and character that they would be open enough to look after everybody's well-being without some sort of inherent racism and inherent prejudice, and that's fundamentally flawed. It's going to destroy the harmony that exists between groups, and it is classic divide and conquer, divide and rule strategy.
Yeah, and we're all sick of it. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. This has been absolutely glorious to have you on. Very level and very calm. I really like that whole vibration. And absolutely, I would protect you as much as anybody else who was born in the same village as I was. Absolutely, unquestionably, everybody. This is author and pundit Satish Sharma. Absolute joy to have you with us this morning.
Have a wonderful day, Sonia, and thank you so much for allowing me to play around with the thoughts of your wonderful audience.
You're absolutely welcome. Thank you. Take good care of yourself. Come back soon. Take care. Lovely to have him with us. Yes, a different viewpoint. And I appreciate a different viewpoint. Thank you so much, Satish. Great guest. Thanks, Son. No worries. Jackie, no worries at all. Please bear in mind, people, I can't always see your comments when I'm talking. I literally am unable to see everything. I'm literally unable to see anything. Namaste, brother, says Brett. And that is the point, isn't it? That whole kind of announcement from, was it South Yorkshire Police or North Yorkshire Police? I think it was South Yorkshire Police, where they said that they were going to suspend the employment of white officers. And he's absolutely right. What it's telling us is that if I were a white police officer, then I would only be interested in protecting white people. That's patently a lie. Patently a lie. obviously. We will shortly be bringing in our next guest. Let me just play something really quickly. I thought this was quite good fun. Let's have a little bit of fun. If I can find it, I might not be able to find it, but I will find it later. But I want to draw a comparison between Homer Simpson and Elon Musk, as pointed out to me by lovely viewer JD. Thank you so much for that. Right. If there's something I could quickly do before our next guest, I will happily do it. And that is maybe not. I think actually I'll come back to Thug Watch, which is to do with Andrew Tate and Joey Barton. Two of my favorite influencers, as we all know. But I will save that until after our next guest. Fascinating next guest. He's been with us before. And well, let's start talking about that a little bit. The Manchester Arena bombing in England on the 22nd of May 2017. It followed a concert by the American pop singer Ariana Grande. I'm sure many of you know about it. The bombing occurred, we were told, at 22:31. We were told it killed 22 people, injured a further 1,017, and destroyed the arena's foyer. The atrocity was said to have been committed by Salman Abedi and aided by his brother Hassam Abedi. That's the official narrative. So it's important to understand. It was recently challenged in the High Court by Richard D. Hall, who was sued and sadly lost his case for harassment against people who were said to be there. But Mr. Hall is not alone in questioning events on that day, which have gone down as the deadliest act of terrorism and the first suicide bombing in the United Kingdom since the July the 7th, 2005 London bombings, which, as we all know, is also a narrative that has been unpacked by many brilliant people and does not stand up to scrutiny. So let's look at this one. Let's bring him in and see what David Hughes, author and cancelled academic, has to say this morning. Good morning, David. How are you?
Well, thank you, Sonia. Thanks for having me back.
Absolute pleasure. So you've really gone in on this, haven't you? And I think you were with us before. We talked about Richard D. Hall before, so there's no need to revisit that because you've been doing your own investigations. So let's not waste a moment. Where do you want to start, David?
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, when we last spoke, I discussed the Richard D. Hall case with you then. And since then, I've done my own investigation into the Manchester Arena incident. I was curious to know why Richard D. Hall was persecuted in the way that he was. And I've now concluded a 20-part series on my Substack. It's about 160,000 words, about two books in length. And there's an awful lot to say about this incident. And there's a great many aspects of it which don't actually stack up in terms of the official story. So if we could, let's begin with the emergency service response, because that's very interesting. So it's well known that the emergency service response was a failure. The fire and rescue service didn't arrive for over 2 hours, and only 3 paramedics actually entered the city room, which was the foyer where the alleged bomb exploded, allegedly. 4 emergency services were involved. We had the police, the fire service, the ambulance service, and also British Transport Police. And what interests me is the command structures of these services. So for each of the 4 services, you have 3 levels of command: gold, silver, and bronze. And therefore, you have at least 12 senior commanders involved, 4 services, 3 levels of command. It's actually slightly more than that because some of the services had more than one bronze commander. And what you find when you look at the inquiry report, so this is the official evidence here, this is not my opinion, is that in every case bar one, in terms of these senior commanders, there were very serious failures involved in what they did. So just to give one example, let's just look at the ambulance service, Northwest Ambulance Service. So the gold commander in this case, the guy at the top, in charge of the strategic response, was a gentleman called Neil Barnes. Now, during the first hour post-detonation, which is the critical, they call it the golden hour, it's the critical time in which you really have to act fast to help casualties. What did the most senior figure of Northwest Ambulance Service do? He sat at home watching the television. Apparently, he had a flight to catch the next morning. So I find that rather extraordinary. If we then look at the next level down, the silver level, a lady by the name of Anne-Marie Rooney failed to call the Gold Commander back after he'd requested this. And instead, she got in touch with a chap called Daniel Smith, who went on to become the Bronze Commander. Now, it's not clear why she did this or why Smith was involved in the capacity that he was, because there were already 2 Bronze Commanders on call that night, one of whom was much more experienced and more appropriate for the role than Smith. But nevertheless, Rooney was very keen to assign this role of Bronze Commander to Smith. And she then failed to provide him with all of the necessary tactical guidance that was required. And then finally, in terms of Smith himself, he got every key decision wrong, according to the inquiry report. So even before appointing himself to the role of Bronze Commander, he was directing ambulances away from the arena to rendezvous at the fire station instead. He did not get in touch with the police Bronze Commander to establish whether or not the city room was a safe zone. He therefore had no idea whether or not the city room was safe enough for non-specialist paramedics to operate in. In actual fact, it was, and the Greater Manchester Police Bronze Commander had established that no later than 20 minutes after the detonation. And he only allowed 3 paramedics to enter the city room all night. He didn't notice that proper stretchers were required. I mean, people were being brought downstairs on metal crash barriers and trestle tables, and he didn't notice that it would be a good idea to have proper stretchers. So when you look at this is a catastrophic failure in the command structure of the ambulance service, but it's the same across all 4 services. So when I look at that, I think, well, maybe in 1 or 2 cases, maybe slightly more, you could expect things to have gone wrong. It was a stressful environment. Maybe there were, incompetence, failure of processes and procedures and so on. But for all but one of these commanders to be making these kinds of errors, that to me suggests that there was something more to it than that. And I suspect that there was some kind of coordinated stand down. And if so, that would have had to have been ordered by the intelligence services.
Interesting. I mean, this is also obviously documented in the media as well as at the official inquiry. Anyway, there is talk about the chaos with ambulances. There's imagery of the chaos that took place. And as you say, it's interesting if it happened on one occasion with one of those departments, and then that might be something, but all of them, you have to question it. So what then followed, I think, is the possible fingerprints of secret services and counterterrorism policing, right?
Right. So I mean, that's the first clue, really, that MI5 and counterterrorism policing might have had something to do with this. Another clue has to do with the role of exercises and drills, which often seem to be involved in false flag terror events. So, for example, anyone familiar with 9/11 will know all about the war games in the sky that day. In terms of the 7/7 bombings in London, the extraordinary claim by Peter Power that his crisis management company had been running drills that very morning, in his words, quote, based on simultaneous bombs going off precisely at the railway stations that were affected.
Extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be a coincidence, can it? Or we might think about Event 201 just before the pseudo pandemic of 2020. So exercises and drills do play a role in these kind of deep structural events. And we find the same thing again when we look at the Manchester Arena incident. According to the inquiry report itself, there were at least 9 multi-agency exercises in Greater Manchester in 2016 and 2017 in preparation for a mass casualty terrorist incident.
Wow. It's almost like they knew.
Almost. One of them actually involved the scenario of a terrorist attack in the city room. Interesting character called Ken Upham of Counterterrorism Police. He was line managed by a lady called Liz Forster. He was responsible for organising several of these terror exercises at the arena itself, and yet he failed to appear at the inquiry for health reasons. So he might be the most important name that no one has ever heard of regarding the Manchester Arena incident. But a particularly noticeable training exercise was something called Exercise Winchester Accord. Now, this happened 12 months before the incident at the arena, at the Trafford Centre, which is only 6 miles away from the arena. It involved a mock suicide bomber and large numbers of crisis actors covered in moulage, which is kind of fake injuries, and fake blood, and they all lay around pretending to be injured, and the emergency services simulated a response to this pretend terrorist attack. Now, what's extraordinary about this when you look into it are the number of parallels between Exercise Winchester Accord in 2016 and the Manchester Arena incident in 2017. So, for example, the fire service played no meaningful role in either case. There was a failure to establish a forward command post in both cases. There was a failure to alert the ambulance service that it was safe to approach in both cases. The police force duty officer was overburdened in both cases. And so we have to ask, was Exercise Winchester Accord a catastrophic failure, as Pete Weatherby QC claimed at the inquiry? Or, from the perspective of the perpetrators, was it almost ideal preparation for what would take place 1 year later? So if we're thinking about the possibility of an exercise or a drill, we then have to look at the primary observable evidence, and some of the best evidence we have are the bar footage, which was a 43-second camera phone piece of footage that was shot about 12 to 15 minutes after the detonation. And we also have a photograph by a chap called Chris Parker, which was taken at around the same time. And they provide primary observable evidence of what we can actually see in the city room at the time. And there are no pools of blood. There are no clear evidence of no clear evidence of injuries. There's no sense of any urgency or any panic on the part of the people present. There's just some people lying on the floor with others kneeling over them. So there's quite a lot to be said in terms of the possibility of exercises and drills. There's more to be said also about potential operatives on the night. I won't get into that here, but part 11 of my series deals with it. Essentially, Richard D. Hall posited about half a dozen characters who were behaving suspiciously in the city room prior to the detonation. And I've looked into that, and everything he says actually checks out. For example, about half an hour before the detonation, we find that there was a former counter-terrorism officer in the room next to the wife of a serving counter-terrorism officer. There was also an ex-military man in the room and the head of security in the city room. And shortly after the bang, another ex-military man was one of the first people to enter the city room. So given that this was a concert for young girls, this seems to be a rather extraordinary collection of figures just happening to be gathering just before a surprise terror attack. So there's more I could say on the role of intelligence, but I'll leave it there for now.
This is obviously one of the most famous images that came from it. And I've just picked up a couple of images, of course. I know the bar footage that you're talking about. It is obviously extremely controversial because, as many say, that's probably the closest that we have to, actual. This is immediate evidence, and we can clearly see that room seems to be okay. If a bomb had detonated in it, it wouldn't be looking the way it does in the video. Is there any other reason that we can come up with for why that video doesn't show what they're claiming it should show?
From their perspective, the video shouldn't exist. They don't want primary empirical evidence out there, and they went to great lengths, in fact, to conceal primary observable evidence. So that footage played no role in the inquiry. And the problem with it, from their point of view, is it directly contradicts the narrative that they are trying to sell us. They tell us that the skylight was damaged, that there was shrapnel all over the floor, that a massive TATP shrapnel bomb had just detonated, which would have caused absolute carnage, horrendous injuries. There would have been blood everywhere. And the problem is we just don't see it at all on the bar footage. So it's a very powerful piece of evidence that completely contradicts what we were told.
So the public inquiry did what public inquiries always do, and that is they solidify a narrative, and that's that. And it cannot actually be tested. I mean, we have to be incredibly careful what we say because obviously of the recent court hearing, although that's only civil, of course, but nonetheless, the inquiry is the inquiry, the police investigation, Operation Mantaline. What are we to make of that?
Well, the very name is interesting. Mantaline. What kind of a word is that, I wonder?
Yeah, what kind of word is it, David? I think if anybody's going to break it down, it's going to be you, right?
Well, I looked into it, and the linguistic origins of that word go back to the term mantle, which refers to the idea of cloaking or covering something up. So I did wonder if there was something in that. Now, the police investigation itself raises many questions. So at least 3 of us now have unearthed evidence that the police investigation actually fabricated evidence. So, for example, Ian Davis notes that the white doors to the hospitality suite had several very obvious black damage marks on them the following day. However, again, when we look at the bar footage, which was recorded only 12 to 15 minutes after detonation, we see no damage to the doors. So that damage must have been fabricated after the event. There is an anonymous researcher who goes by the name of Pig Hui, and she notes something very similar in terms of a white wall panel in the room. There were 2 black damage marks to that wall panel the following morning, which again, we do not see in the bar footage. So again, must have been fabricated. And I myself I actually visited the city room in person last week. And one of the things that's, yeah.
That must have been quite weird after your research, though, because I know that feeling as a journalist. Okay,
Yeah,
go
very,
on.
very, very eerie.
Mhm.
But one of the things that surprised me, I mean, a lot of it, they put kind of green cladding up to cover up a lot of where the damage would have been. And the old ticket office has gone completely now. But there is some brickwork in the city room, which Operation Manteline put out some photographs of, claiming that it had been kind of peppered with shrapnel damage. And so I noticed this brickwork, and it's not covered up; it's still there. And I thought, wow, that looks really quite pristine. They've done an amazing job in terms of either replacing or repairing the bricks. And then I looked more closely at the photograph that Operation Manteline had provided of this brickwork. And when you look really closely, you find that the marks on the wall appear to be photoshopped. They are all a kind of C shape, right-angled C shape, and they're all the same shape, but it's just kind of rotated around at different angles. And so I looked at that and I thought that looks mighty, mighty suspicious. Now, the point about this, you mentioned building damage before. The only evidence of building damage comes from Operation Manteline. Otherwise, we can't find any primary observable evidence of building damage. So, for example, several witnesses and the mainstream media ran with the line that the skylight, the giant skylight in the roof, was damaged.
Right.
And yet, an anonymous critic by the name of UK Critical Thinker hired a drone at the start of June, so not long after the event on the 22nd of May, to fly over the top of the city room. And it's very clear that the skylight is completely undamaged. And so it would appear that we have been misled by the inquiry. Another very important role that the inquiry played, particularly through Detective Superintendent Teresa Lamb and Detective Inspector Michael Russell, was producing what they called evidence summaries for dozens of individuals involved on the night, based on audio-visual evidence, particularly the CCTV evidence. And from this, they basically constructed a narrative of what happened. Now, what's suspicious about this is that the public has not been allowed to see just CCTV footage just playing smoothly from any of the dozens and dozens of cameras on the night before the detonation. And there doesn't seem to be any good reason why that wouldn't be available. Instead, what happened was that the police cherry-picked 806 CCTV stills around which they built their narrative, and those stills were released by the inquiry. And so it's a very selective presentation of evidence, and I strongly suspect that if we'd have seen more of that evidence, there would be reasons to doubt it.
You're asking some uncomfortable questions, David. I mean, and I mean, but it has
The
to
evidence is what it is.
Exactly. And talking about evidence, what about evidence of medical treatment? Where are we with that? Because that's been a controversy, hasn't it?
Yeah, again, so for a mass casualty incident with 22 fatalities, 59 plus hospitalizations on the night, hundreds more reported injuries, we'd expect it to be very, very easy to find persuasive evidence of medical treatment being administered to scores of casualties. But when we look into it, the opposite actually turns out to be the case. Now, for some of the first responders, we're dealing with, for example, rail officers, transport police, arena security staff. It's understandable that they don't have the relevant medical training and wouldn't have been able to provide medical treatment in any meaningful sense. However, when the 3 paramedics arrived, and there were only 3, and 2 of them didn't arrive until 44 minutes after the bang.
Extraordinary.
It is, isn't it? They do not seem to have actually treated anyone. When you look at the evidence closely, they only seem to have gone around triaging, which is where you assign a label, P1, P2, or P3, based on the severity of the injury. So P1 is most seriously injured, requiring immediate medical treatment because there are life-threatening injuries. P2, again, very serious injuries, perhaps could be delayed for a few hours. P3 is referred to as the walking wounded. And it would appear that they went around giving out these labels, but not actually treating anyone. There's no CCTV evidence of any casualty being treated in the city room. The only witness testimony evidence of providing treatment by members of the public who entered the city room are demonstrably unreliable. There's repeated mentions of defibrillators in the inquiry report, so you might think, gosh, that sounds serious. But when you look very closely, you find that the defibrillators were used only for monitoring purposes. Not once were they used to administer shock. Now, not only is it the case that there's very little evidence of medical treatment being provided, actually what was done was positively dangerous in terms of taking people who allegedly were very seriously injured, moving them onto metal crash barriers and trestle tables, carrying them along a footbridge and then down 2 flights of steps. And some of these witnesses report what a painful experience that was. Now, I mean, this is a very, very risky business, both from a medical and a legal perspective. And it seems barely plausible that that should have been allowed to happen rather than paramedics being allowed up into the city room. So there are a few cases where there seems to be quite strong evidence of medical treatment being provided, particularly the 3 fatalities who were evacuated from the city room. So John Atkinson, Georgina Calendar, and Safi Rose Roussos. In those 3 cases, there are numerous medical professionals who have provided witness statements and testimony to the effect that they provided medical treatment, both in the ambulance and in the various hospitals. Now, we can't directly disprove that evidence, but there are still reasons to ask questions. None of the corresponding witness statements are actually available to the public. The public has not seen any primary evidence to corroborate these accounts. And even if they're true, and I'm not saying they're false necessarily, but even if they're true, we've only got 3 cases there, which is statistically nowhere near enough to provide a broad enough cross-section to establish that scores and scores of people were also critically injured. Finally, on the medical treatment, they set up something called a casualty clearing station on the train station concourse, which is where they took these allegedly injured people to. And again, it's very hard to find any evidence of casualties actually being treated at the casualty clearing station. Again, we have a lot of triaging going on, but very little treatment. And it's most peculiar because the average time that those casualties waited on the cold floor of the train station was 2 hours.
Wow. I mean, it's just extraordinary, isn't it? And talking about those survivors, one of the things that you said was, and I think is an interesting question, is why were the survivors far more visible afterwards in legacy media than they were on the night on CCTV? That's an interesting question. Are you able to answer it?
Well, I have my suspicions that it has to do with propaganda. Now, what's interesting about the survivors, bear in mind that officially there were over 300 people in the city room at the moment of detonation. Officially, 59 had to be taken to hospital on the night. and officially, the total number of injured people on the night, either physically or psychologically, rose to over 1,000 after the injury compensation scheme was introduced. However, despite all of these people who you would expect to be injured, and many of them very seriously, I can only locate 6 of them on the CCTV footage. 6. So where are the rest? Were they all, in fact, there? And these are very uncomfortable questions that we need to ask,
Extremely.
particularly in light of what happened to Richard D. Hall, because he put it to the court that, in fact, Martin Hibbert wasn't even at the arena on the night. There's no hard evidence placing him there. And he asked the court to release CCTV imagery, which it is claimed shows Hibbert and his daughter to be present, and the court refused to do so. He asked for the relevant medical records before and after that night to be shown to him, just to prove that Hibbert was even there, and the court refused to do so. So, again, it's very uncomfortable territory when we're talking about some of these alleged survivors. Now, it's very difficult to find them on CCTV or indeed anywhere else in terms of the night itself. However, they are highly visible in the media afterwards, constantly reminding the public of that night and the supposedly ever-present threat of terrorism and this idea that Islamic fundamentalists could at any time kind of attack the most innocent members of our society, mostly young girls in this case. They appeared on very high-profile shows like the Pride of Britain Awards, for example. And again, just coming back to Hibbert briefly, he has appeared on average in the media once every 2 weeks since 2017. And this is in addition to doing things like scaling Mount Kilimanjaro for the Spinal Injuries Association. So he's a very, very visible, high-profile individual. He was named as one of the top 10 in the so-called disabled power list.
Wow.
And so again, what that shows is he's a very powerful individual in terms of the influence that he exerts. So it's a peculiar situation where you have, I call it a cadre. There's certain of these individuals who appear again and again and again and again in the media. And their role is very obviously to enforce the official narrative in the minds of the public.
Yes.
But again, when you listen to their testimonies at the inquiry, many of them are highly unconvincing.
Let me read you some of the comments that we're getting in. Good morning to you, Sue. Sue said, my sister and niece who were there are not crisis actors, because they're talking about crisis actors in the live chat. I have never heard them so shaken, and the foyer of the Manchester Arena is open and eerie and not how it was. How do you respond to that? Because you're not suggesting that people weren't there, that people, something happened, didn't it? Something definitely happened, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, if you are in a crowded room full of people, and there's an extremely loud bang, smoke fills the room, then within 9 seconds, I think it was, a tannoy announcement comes on urging people to evacuate. And a stampede then begins as everyone kind of rushes to the exits. Who is going to doubt that a serious event has taken place?
Right. We're not suggesting, for example, that Sue's sister and niece are complicit in this. A lot of people have been carried along with it. And that's the other thing that I need to address, David, because it's being mentioned in the comments, is how many people would need to be involved in this. Actually, when I talked to Ian Davis, we drilled down on the fact you wouldn't actually need a lot of people to be in on it. What do you think about that?
At the end of part 11 of my series, I have very diligently counted up the number of figures who we know were present in the city room post detonation, and I make it at least 111. And that's just the people who were there. That doesn't include people who were involved in planning whatever occurred. So actually, when you look at it, you're probably looking at hundreds of people, which is pretty shocking when you think about it. And for most people, we wouldn't imagine that a deception of that scale would be possible. But this is precisely why it's important to look at the evidence very closely and to examine it very carefully, because it is pointing in the direction of a mass deception incident in which hundreds of people must have been involved. And again, one of the things they're trying to do now is to shut down the role of investigative journalism in challenging this narrative. But those 111 people that I list do not include anyone who was injured. None of the fatalities, none of the casualties. These are just people who were present either in a professional capacity or members of the public who entered the room shortly afterwards. These are the kind of people who investigative journalists really need to be interviewing, because they saw firsthand what the situation was in the city room. But as far as I know, none of them has ever given an interview.
Frankie thinks, according to CIA operations, that you'd be able to do it with far less people, which is also possible. I mean, the thing is, what you're doing is you're drilling down on the evidence. And I mean, the evidence is just the evidence. The facts are just the facts, right? Whether people like them or not. But I take your point, Frankie. I do actually think it could be done with less people. But the other thing, of course, is the big question. And that is, if this was a false flag, if this was a psyop, why? To what end? And we've had now 8 years since to see what could be the reason for that. What have you come up with?
Oh, well, it's the usual reasons when it comes to false flag terrorism. So domestically, you have deprivation of civil liberties in exchange for the promise of security. We've seen the in process Martin's Law, so-called, off the back of this. This is named after the alleged victim, Martin Het. And this law would bring in legislation for any venue that holds over 100 people would be required to perform some quite strict security checks. So this is quite oppressive, really, towards the public. We've seen Martin Hibbert calling for Eve's Law, which would make it free, basically, to sue anybody for harassment who's challenging the narrative, as far as I can tell.
Which is really problematic from a journalistic perspective, because that just means we would have to accept every official narrative and not question it.
And that's the point of it, really, isn't it? And then in terms of the kind of foreign affairs aspect of it, we mustn't forget that Salman Abedi and Hasham Abedi had links to the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group, which was backed by MI6. So they were potential assets being deployed here. And what did we see in 2017? But a massive increase in Western military involvement in Libya. So again, if you're trying to justify that kind of thing to Western publics, then an incident in which a Libyan Islamic fundamentalist terrorist blows himself up and kills a load of children, including young girls at a pop concert. Goes an awful long way to yeah, exactly, incredibly emotive.
Yeah, goes a long way to that. And of course, so what you're saying is that we're dealing with state. This is a state attack, is what you're saying.
Well, it's very interesting. I would call it deep state. If you think back to Operation Gladio, which was the NATO coordinated false flag terrorism campaign across Europe in the 1970s and the 1980s, that first came to light in the early 90s. And when it did come to light, Gladio was the Italian branch of this operation. It transpired that almost no Italian MP had a clue about it. So we can't say the government, we can't say parliament, we can't say politicians are responsible for this. I would imagine most of them are completely clueless. Nevertheless, there is what I call a transnational deep state. And for more about that, see my book, Wall Street, the Nazis and the Crimes of the Deep State. There is an invisible power structure which operates transnationally and nefariously and outside the rule of law and beyond liberal democracy. And it's that power structure, unfortunately, which is now in charge and which is manufacturing these kinds of emergencies to create propaganda, off the back of which very oppressive measures are being introduced.
I mean, as you say, you've written about this extensively, 20-parter most recently on your Substack. I've already put the link in the description below. Please support David. As you can hear, this is very thorough work. And it must be difficult for you because obviously I started off by describing you as an author and a cancelled academic. Just tell people just briefly what led you into this arena.
9/11 originally, that was back in 2016. And that was my kind of inverted commas wake-up moment. When I looked at the evidence regarding 9/11, it was crystal clear to me that we had been lied to, just massive amounts of evidence, completely at odds with the official narrative. And once you have a moment like that, there's no going back, really. And of course, I then ended up looking at various other false flag terrorist events, and then COVID struck, and that was even bigger still in terms of the deception that's taking place. And what troubled me was the fact that academia doesn't challenge any of this. It just resorts to the kind of conspiracy theory smear and shuts down debate. So there's nothing, it's kind of cowardly in a way. The profession has nothing to say about any of this. So I felt like I had to leave because we've reached a situation now where what's going on in the world is so serious and so dark that, in fact, we have to face up to what's happening. We have to look at the evidence. We have to see how we're being abused and manipulated by very evil people, and we have to put a stop to what's going on.
This is lovely. Halo said, "What an honest guest, full of genuine candor and absolute truth teller." I mean, I think the thing is, the truth comes with its own vibe. I absolutely hear you. I've received you this morning. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think your evidence is stunning. Hard work, though. So you need support. People, this man needs support. We all need support. Good, real journalism needs supporting. Please support this man. This is David Hughes. David, before you leave us, you have to have the last word. What do you want people to know?
Oh, my goodness. I think in the case of the Manchester Arena incident, there's relatively little public interest in it from what I can gauge. I've received relatively little support. My Substack subscribers, didn't really increase during the time that I was writing about this. It's a pretty horrible thing to be writing about. The idea of killing innocents, the idea of deception on this level, the idea of all of our institutions failing us, of a coordinated cover-up, it is too much to bear, I think, for a lot of people. So if I were to have the last word, it would be that we do need to look at this very, very seriously. And, now that it's reached a level of persecuting investigative journalists like Richard D. Hall, simply for exposing evidence, we have to ask, what kind of state are we living in here? I noticed 2 days ago, BitChute has ceased its UK operations. Do we live in a democracy anymore? Do we have free speech anymore? Can we question official narratives anymore? Or are we edging ever closer to a police state? And if you actually care about those questions, then look at this very seriously and get involved yourself.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning, David. Everybody, this is David Hughes. Please do follow his work and, more importantly, support it. Take good care of yourself. Lovely to have you with us today.
Thanks, Sonia.
Wishing you a lovely weekend, David. Enjoy yourself. Take some time to enjoy yourself, for goodness sake, man.
Do my best.
Good. Excellent. Take care. Wonderful. Thorough work. Absolute thorough. I love it when somebody comes armed with that level of information. I absolutely love it. Peter says, thank you, David. Indeed. Benson says, thank you, David. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Right. Want to shake things up a little bit, turn things around. I went down a rabbit hole this week, right? I realized that the anniversary of Prince's death is approaching, and I started doing research, and I came across an interview with comedian Dick Gregory from May the 4th, 2016, just 2 weeks, 14 days after Prince had died. And Dick Gregory said very, very clearly that they had killed him. So I thought, let me follow what Dick Gregory has to say. Let me start to bring in some imagery. So first of all, one of the things that Dick Gregory said was he aligned Prince's death with the birthday of Queen Elizabeth II. Have a listen. Oh, let me just give you this little background information first. And that is the first time, I need to bring in some videos, the first time that I had encountered anything to do with Prince and Dick Gregory was when Prince was actually talking about how he was inspired by Dick Gregory. And it was to do with, let me just see if I can find it. I must be able to find it. Prince. And it was to do with when Prince had first talked about chemtrails, right? Here we go. Let me remind you of this, first of all.
Said affects all of us. He said something that really hit home about this phenomena of chemtrails. And, you know, when I was a kid, I used to see these trails in the sky all the time. And so, oh, that's cool. A jet just went over. And then you started to see a whole bunch of them. And the next thing you know, everybody in your neighborhood was fighting and arguing and you didn't know why. Okay? And you really didn't know why. I mean, everybody was fighting. So he started riffing about the chemtrails. And he started to say things that hit home so hard. And I would recommend that everybody try to get what he said online or wherever and try to get a copy of it and just listen to it. Because I was so moved that I had to write the song.
And he did write a song that was inspired by what Dick Gregory had said at the State of the Nation. So that was kind of like the first thing that I knew in terms of Prince and Dick Gregory. And Prince talked about that in 2009. It was on a PBS show. And Prince, of course, died April the 21st, 2016, multi-award winning, multi-million selling American singer, songwriter, multi-musician. I mean, absolute creative genius, famous for his androgynous style, his high musicianship, and the flamboyant stage shows that he put on. And he left us 2016. So anyway, this is what Dick Gregory said that made me start going down that rabbit hole. Have a listen to this.
Turned 90. The Queen just turned 90. There was a big celebration. And coincidentally, it was the same day that Prince passed away.
And it was the same day she was here in Washington, D.C. Front page of the Washington Post. Got her family dressed in pink, purple. And that's when she announced that Charles it's going to skip over him and point to the little boy, the Prince. The same day they killed Prince. They killed Prince on the plane. And that plane is owned by Warren Buffett. And so those are the games they play, man.
Well,
So I decided to fact check what Dick Gregory had said. It's as I say, it's quite an old interview. It's 9 years old. He's completely crotchety and grumpy as anything and loses his temper on several occasions with the interviewer. But that's Dick Gregory being Dick Gregory. And so what Dick Gregory is saying, that Prince was absolutely killed. He said people shouldn't automatically assume it was something that Prince had recently done, but should bear in mind that people in the entertainment industry would wait years, even decades, to exact revenge. And Dick Gregory put it down to Prince's emancipation from Warner's. Now, I worked with Prince. This is an original copy of Emancipation, which was Prince's first album when he left Warner's and signed with another label. And I worked with Prince during his The Most Beautiful Girl in the World period. Now, I didn't work with him directly, but let me tell you what happened and why I think that there is some truth to what Dick Gregory is saying. And I'm also going to tell you how I fact-checked what he said about the Queen, and some of it bore out and some of it didn't. But one of the things that happened with Prince was that he was aware that Warner were treating him like a slave, like they treat all artists for the most part, and he wanted out. And so what Prince obviously did was he stopped calling himself Prince because he said, they own it. That's my slave name for the record companies. And he called himself this unpronounceable name, which was The Symbol. And The Most Beautiful Girl in the World was licensed to Adele in Germany and then licensed in the UK to a small independent label called Music of Life. Well, as it happened, I knew the guys who ran Music of Life, and they were actually going to be away for the 2-week period during which time they were releasing The Most Beautiful Girl in the World in the UK. So they asked me to run the label. So I was literally running the label when Prince had his only #1 record in the UK. I was running that label. It was mad. It was a mad experience, but I got a good insight into what was going on. And so Prince had upset a lot of people within major corporations by doing that, and not least because Warner's had never given him a #1 hit in the UK. And suddenly a little kind of back street just off of Oxford Street, small independent label had managed to do it. It was quite phenomenal. Quite phenomenal stuff. So let me just continue with this. And I think it's really interesting. So what Dick Gregory said was, he said that the Queen was on the front page of the Washington Post on the same day that Prince died, which also happened to be the Queen's 90th birthday. And he made a gesture regarding Charles and Prince William. And Gregory said that the Queen was in the US as part of her 90th birthday celebrations, and he saw deep significance in that. Well, I fact-checked this as much as I humanly could. And the Queen was certainly featured in the Washington Post regarding her 90th birthday celebrations on that day. But she wasn't in the US. She was actually in the UK. Let me see if I can bring up some images just to back up what I'm saying here. I wonder if I've copied them across appropriately. Maybe I haven't, but and she also wasn't wearing pink. She was wearing blue. But what was interesting was her pre-birthday pictures were her in pink. So I think that's what he was confusing it with. But what was also interesting, and I think that this is where it gets quite interesting, and bear in mind, he's elderly guy there, and I definitely have some memory issues at times. I think we all do. It is a significant factor of aging, and there's no shame in that whatsoever. But what I think is significant is, and I think this is where he might have confused it in terms of being in America, is who did the Queen have her birthday lunch with over the next day? The Obamas. And President Obama was still the sitting president of the United States and would be until the following year in January. So these were not just any old guests. So I started to go down this rabbit hole. And when he talks about how the Queen went to the boy, the prince, over the king, what he's actually referring to, I think, is Obama had lunch with the Queen and the Duke on the following day, and then in the evening spent it with Prince William and Kate. So Charles was completely out of the picture. And I think that's what he's talking about when he said that the Queen skipped over Charles to the Prince. I think that's possibly what he's talking about. And so that was interesting. But I want to drill down more on what he said. He talked about how they killed him on the plane. Well, the evidence doesn't back that up. The evidence doesn't back that up because let me just explain this to you, right? On the last days leading up to Prince's death in 2016, he was doing the last dates on his piano and microphone tour. It had to be rescheduled. They said he had flu. It was rescheduled for a week later. And the last date that he did it on was April the 14th. And I actually do have some imagery from that piano and microphone tour. Now, this was Prince stripped down. I think he'd tired of all the kind of flamboyant stage settings, although they were brilliant in their time. And it was literally just him, a man and his music. And by all accounts, he was kind of like at the peak of who he is. He was loving this tour. And but he was on an airplane and he definitely became unresponsive because I've heard the phone call. And a jet met the ambulance and the paramedics injected him with what was a so-called save shot, which is associated with someone having a drug overdose. His friend Judith Hill was with him. And what was weird for everybody was this idea that he would have had a drug overdose because he was known for his clean living. And in Illinois, 6 days before his death, he had, been taken to this hospital, kept overnight for observation. And so it would appear to, as far as I can ascertain, that he absolutely did survive that plane journey and he was taken into a hospital. And then On the 20th of April, a day before his death, he was in Minnesota at the North Memorial Medical Center. He had regular visits with the doctor who ran tests on him. And at the same time, his assistant called a doctor across the country who couldn't visit, but was sending his son an addiction specialist. So again, it reinforces this whole idea that Prince was an addict. And what actually it was interesting was a lot of people around Prince. I've looked at a lot of witness testimonies. They said that he was so anti-drugs and drink that you weren't even allowed to drink backstage. Drugs were a firing offense. Now, bear in mind that the official cause of death was a drug overdose, fentanyl. That was the official cause of death. And there was also his stepsister came out, Laura. Now, bear in mind, a lot of people came out claiming to be related to him, but his stepsister came out. And I think that she was actually someone who was close to him when he was growing up. And she had said to an attorney that he had a drug problem with coke, and she worried that he would die of a heart attack. The attorney said he started taking it to overcome his stage fright. Prince had terrible stage fright, in part because of the brutality he faced from his father when he was little. His father was completely disapproving about Prince's musicianship and had a piano that he didn't allow Prince to play. And I would suggest it was probably because his father realized what an absolute talent his son was, and probably he paled by comparison. Some parents can be like that, jealous of their children, believe it or not. But anyway, that it was said that he started to take coke on and off to help with his stage fright. Now, these were people around him, but there were also people around him saying that is impossible. He didn't allow drugs backstage. So already we've got an interesting division there. No medical records were found that documented any cocaine, but he did take Percocet for pain relief. Now, Percocet is a pain reliever. And then after his death, it was also claimed, there's a number of things. It was claimed on the front page, a splash story in America, that he had AIDS, and that was why he was taking Percocet. That's not on his medical records. Nobody around him knew anything about that. Then on top of that, his ex-girlfriend, Anna Fantastic, claimed at his funeral that he had early onset Alzheimer's. All of these things are being claimed that aren't showing on his medical records, right? So there were all these people and publications he had who claimed he had everything from AIDS to Alzheimer's, but none of it was on his medical records. Now, it is possible not to have certain things on your medical records, because believe me when I tell you, I have not told doctors everything that I've done in my life. Absolutely not. For exactly this reason, I don't want certain things on my medical records, right? And what's also interesting about the whole fentanyl issue is that he had no prescriptions for 12 months before death. So did he obtain the fentanyl illegally? Was it an illegal supply? And if it was it a case that when they were creating these fentanyl tabs, were they measuring them accurately? Did each tablet have exactly the same amount of fentanyl in or not? Which brings me to, was this a murder? Was it an accident? So what actually happened was on the night before his death, there were no witnesses. He was served dinner. He was on his own. And he was found dead at about 9:45 in the morning by a Paisley Park employee. Now, Paisley Park, of course, was his massive complex. And despite what people say, he didn't actually live there. He had a residence there, but he had his home, which was just kind of like 20-minute drive away. But Paisley Park was his massive complex. This is where he did a lot of his recording. It's absolutely beautiful inside. I've seen tours inside. And he was found inside a lift. And they estimated that he had been dead for at least 6 hours. And the paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead around 6 minutes to 10 minutes past 10 in the morning. That was the morning of 21st of April, 2016. He was just 57. And what was interesting, there was literally no record of any great event that led to his death. Like literally none. For many people, it was like, what on earth happened? What on earth happened? So I did go down the Dick Gregory rabbit hole. I found that some of it did stand up to scrutiny. And I do think it's interesting that he died on the Queen's 90th birthday. And many people believed that she was going to skip over Charles and go to William. I think those things are interesting from a kind of like a symbolic perspective. And let us remember the great man, by the way. And so obviously loads of money has been made off the back of Prince. And this is a man who was prepared to speak out. He called out Warner. He called out the music industry. He said they treated people like slaves. I had firsthand experience of that. And I saw what happened when a small independent label got involved with Prince. And then on top of that, he was talking about things like chemtrails, for goodness sake. And the one thing I think absolutely that resonated so strongly with me that Dick Gregory said is that don't expect them to enact their revenge immediately. That's not how it works. And I think that we can see that with people like Michael Jackson and Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston, as one example, had proved to be a problem probably for the last decade of her life to her record company because she wasn't doing what they wanted her to do. So these people, they're not interested in just taking you out right there and then for some chump change. These are for bigger issues, absolute bigger issues. It is suspicious, absolutely suspicious. And I just wanted to kind of check that because when I watched that Dick Gregory interview, I was like, what? This is actually mad. It's like completely mad. But the reality is that obviously Prince has sold millions and millions of records. He continues to be a going concern. And one of the sad things, I was listening to some of his kind of fandom and they were talking about going to visit Paisley Park. So you can go and visit Paisley Park now, of course, because it's like a theme park and he's not making money from it. And this fan talked about how they used to be able to look at the urn where Prince's ashes were in, but that's no longer available because some of the family who came out of the woodwork demanded to divide up his ashes. So like 6 different people have Prince's ashes, so they could no longer be on display at his Paisley Park. It's very, very weird. He sold more than 100 million records worldwide. He's literally one of the best-selling artists of all time. And so I am here to say that I went down the Dick Gregory rabbit hole. And while I didn't agree with everything he said, I do absolutely concur that Prince did not die at his own hands. I believe that Prince was taken out. That is my feeling about it. And, you know, I think that it's very easy to say, oh, that person was famous. It's suspicious. But this was suspicious. There was nothing. And then for them all to come out and then claim that he had AIDS, claimed he had Alzheimer's, all trying to justify why he had this death and why he might have been taking fentanyl or why he might have been taking Percocet. Like, what was really going on there? What was really going on? It must have been incredibly lonely for him. It reminds me of that meme, and that is, it's lonely at the top, but you eat better. And in fact, he wasn't even doing that. He weighed a mere 112 pounds at death. That's about 8 stone. And you know, by 2010, he'd had a double hip replacement from his huge moves on stage. But I think that, yes, Mr. Right, it reminds me of MJ and his intrigue. And remember, Michael Jackson was taken out by his doctor. Remember that, right? And Tom Petty died of fentanyl. Is that right, Frank? And Prince did not do hard drugs, says Drumstick. Well, that was kind of like the thing that was said. But as I say, his stepsister came out and this attorney came out and said, no, he did take cocaine occasionally. And he did it because he was scared on stage. But who knew? He'd also, before his death, become a Jehovah's Witness. So he wasn't up for having blood transfusions or anything else like that. Yes, Marco, I think there is a correlation between Prince's death and Michael Jackson's death. Yes, I do. Rest in peace, Prince. Rest in peace, Prince. Right. Okay, kids, what do I want to say? What do I want to say? Geoengineering, Matt Lamman will be with us in May to promote the event on the summer solstice. June 21st from London, I'll be speaking and live streaming. And again, thank you all for your geoengineering pictures. Of course, I am not able to show all of them. I'm afraid it's simply impossible. But if you are somebody who's just like, some of our wonderful viewers send me them repeatedly, which I do appreciate, and I'm still keeping them on file. But I'm going to let me show Kath's. Kath, if I can find yours, I will. It's from yesterday. Well, I definitely had it earlier. You know how it is. Got to be here somewhere. Here it is. Let me just check this out. Right. Kath said, it was nice and clear, and then chemtrails spoiling the beauty of sunset. And I've had a lot of people say that about the UK this week. It was absolutely beautifully clear, and it was beautifully clear in many respects. I actually filmed one of the longest chemtrails, I've ever seen yesterday. County Durham last night. Is that what it was, Kath? Thank you for sending that in. I very much appreciate it. And thank you to everybody, as I say, who sends me in your chemtrail pictures. I do try and use as many as I humanly can. I really do. And right. Briefly, I don't want to dwell too much on this. Thug watch, as I like to call it these days. Andrew Tate, he's been accused of gun threat allegations in a UK lawsuit. It is claimed that Andrew Tate, obviously the influencer, pointed a gun in a woman's face and said, "You're going to do as I say or they'll be held to pay." That is according to one of 4 women suing him in the UK court. A preliminary hearing for the case is due to take place on the 15th of April, so that's next week. And as I say, this allegation is described in court documents, which also contain very detailed accounts of allegations of rape, assault, and coercive control. One woman claims Tate threatened to kill her. Another says he made clear that he would kill anyone who spoke to her. A third claims that Tate convinced her he had killed other people. Tate's defense has denied all claims, calling them a pack of lies, gross fabrications. Currently, Tate continues to face more serious legal challenges in a number of countries, a mixture of kind of civil and criminal cases in the UK, US, and Romania. He had a travel ban that was recently lifted. He went to the US, where he was then accused in a civil lawsuit of attempting to strangle his girlfriend during sex. The court documents are absolutely horrendous. I don't want to go into any great detail about them, but they include lots of horrible, horrible allegations of attempts at strangulation and rape and sexual assault. Just horrible, horrible stuff. And 3 of the women previously reported Tate to the police, but in 2019, the Crown Prosecution Service, the CPS, decided not to bring criminal charges. They are now seeking damages arising from the, quote, assault, battery, and infliction of intentional harm. And lawyer Matt Jury, who is representing the women, told the BBC his clients have been denied justice by the police and CPS while watching Andrew Tate's influence grow. And honestly, it is time. He needs to be brought back to the UK. He absolutely does. I understand that Russell Brand, as one example, is coming back voluntarily to the UK to face the magistrates court at the beginning of May. And just to talk about another toxic influencer, Joey Barton, he's not having a good 2025, is he? Oh, what a pity. Recently convicted of assaulting his partner and having kicked her in the head. The ex-footballer has now been found to have defamed TV presenter Eniola Aluka. It doesn't mean that she will win at trial, but it does mean that she has something to work with if she seeks to go to trial. This is a preliminary hearing. The irony, when I went through the judgment, the irony is that the court judgment quotes a previous judgment against Barton involving broadcaster Jeremy Vine. So they're literally using his own cases against him now. I have no pity for him whatsoever. He's another one who said a few truthful things and people fell over themselves to treat him like God. People even publicly funded this wealthy man after he couldn't stop running his mouth on social media. I see him as nothing but material for the enemy, whether intentioned or not. Barton has lined people up to be sued so easily on social media. Please stop supporting this woman-hating and woman-assaulting chimp. That's my word on that. I got to play you this video. I didn't get round to it the other day. Yes, I'm well aware we've gone past 11, but so what? It's one of those days. And let me just see if I can bring in this video. I think it's great. I talked about Elon Musk's Cybertruck and how it's been recalled because there's so many problems with it. And it's basically a piece of tech and it's ugly as anything. And so I just did this. I hope you'll like it. Let me find it. Friday videos. Yeah. And JD said, I chuckled about Elon's ugly car being the result of everyone telling him he is a genius. The exact thing happened in The Simpsons. It did indeed. And here's a blast of it.
Questions to Mr. Homer Simpson, the man with the vision. The man who's going to bust this company out of its rut. The man who's going to change American transportation forever.
I want a horn here, here, and here. You can never find a horn when you're mad. And they should all play La Cucaracha.
Can do, Mr. S.
Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the car designed for the average man, the Homer.
Any questions? What does this monstrosity cost? Jerry, what's the sticker price? $82,000! This monstrosity cost $82,000! What have I done?
Well, that's a good question. And then I linked it to a video where Elon comes out with one of his employees. And this was when they were launching the Cybertruck, and they were claiming that, well, the Cybertruck would just kind of protect you in war situations. And so check out what happens to Elon's Cybertruck if you're not already familiar with this video.
Not bad. Franz, could you try to break this glass, please? Yeah. Sure? Yeah. Oh my God. Well, maybe that was a little too hard.
Maybe that was a little too hard. And then he said, shall I try breaking the back window? And he broke the back window as well. And yeah, the Cybertruck is ugly as anything. It really is. Ugly, ugly, ugly. And but thank you, JD, for reminding me of that. I remember that very well. I used to love The Simpsons. I really did. And donators, thank you for being here. We've made it to the magical 100 episode mark. Yes, we have. This feels wonderful to me. This is my thing, and it's become our thing. And thank you to donators, recent donators, F. Young, M. Taylor, Claire D, and Stanley. And thank you to my new to my new patrons on Patreon, to Jan and Eleanor and Nicola and Marlena and Kirsty and Christine and MK, and on the super stickers. Thank you for Manira and Cole Butler. Thank you all. Thank you however you contribute or donate to Wake Up. I truly appreciate it, and I appreciate you. And thank you to the response to my Madeleine McCann investigation. And hello to Ewan, who was keen to press me about the Podesta denial about Madeleine. And I like people doing that. I like people pressing me. Press me. I mean, obviously not physically, don't do that. But if I say something and you disagree with it and you want to show me something else, contact me. Let me know. I am always open to new intel. But what was great, and it was really brilliant, we had quite a jokey series of emails between us, is because Ewan sent me the email, the Podesta email, the Hillary Clinton email, where a lot of where almost all of this idea had come from, that the Podestas had been in Portugal. And I was reminded actually that email was written in 2014, which was 7 years after Madeleine went missing. And that was the origin of the lie that the Podestas were in Portugal. But as I said to you, and if you literally find a source that the Podestas were in Portugal on or around May the 3rd, 2007, I'm in. Bring it on. Thank you also, Markuson, for your contributions. You lovely, lovely human being. Right. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to this full moon weekend in Libra. It's the pink moon. It's the sign of the scales, justice, balance, harmony, peace, love. And I wanted to talk about the importance of balance in my life. I was an extremist. I was an absolute extremist during my 20s. When I say I was an extremist, I hardly ate, but I think I said this before. People who knew me used to call me the 3 C's. And that was for Coca-Cola, which I drank a lot of. It was Diet Coke, the worst. Cigarettes, because I smoked like an absolute train. And coffee. And those were the 3 things that I did on a regular basis. And at the peak of my actual smoking cigarettes, I smoked 80 a day, and they were the big ones, Dunhill International, right? So I was an extremist, okay? And I learned later in life, in my 40s, the importance of balance. And I think it's perfect for this weekend and the sign of the scales. And my balance comes from moderation. I believe pretty much a little bit of everything is okay. That's kind of like my attitude towards life. And what I've learned from moderating myself is that I have increased my productivity. I have far better time management in my life than I practically have ever had in my whole life. I also, as I said to you on Wednesday, I'm living my best life as a consequence of moderation and balance. No doubt about it at all. Because the thing is, if people can control your emotions, they can control you. So I remain very balanced emotionally these days. Hallelujah. Thank you so much. I never thought I'd get here, by the way. I used to be an emotional mess. But for the most part, I can receive stuff now and I just go, okay, well, how do I want to deal with that? And that's how it goes. But the other thing that's happened from moderation and balance is I have actually improved my physical health and my mental health. No doubt about it. The clarity I have as a consequence of balance and moderation. You can't buy this stuff. And I've also had a reduction in sickness and being absent from things, be that work or just in my life in general. And I am definitely happier. I'm definitely less stressed. My environment is less stressed. And so I'm a big advocate of moderation and balance. What say you? What time on Sunday? Wait, what? I don't know what you're talking about. What's going on, love? Something that's just completely thrown me. What's that? I was traveling yesterday and drank too much coffee and not enough water. I felt terrible in the evening, dizzy, tired, learnt my lesson. Got you. Crazy Bunny, have you got something on Sunday at 6:15? Put the link in the description, my love. Only cans. Got you. Sunday 6:15, everybody, only cans. Is this the drill down on Madeleine McCann? And please do support them. They are obviously friends of this show. As I age, getting more crazy. Are you really? Well, so the thing is, I definitely feel much more kind of moderate. I definitely feel much more balanced. And I just wanted to share that with you, really, about the importance of that, and not kind of like to overly dwell on it, because I don't need to. All I know is that if I say, for example, I want a beer, I'll have a beer, but I won't have maybe 7 or 8 that I might have done before, right? That's what I mean by moderation, is I'm not going to deny myself. This is a short life to all intents and purposes. So if I want a beer, then sod it, I'll have one. And if I want sweet food, then sod it, I'll have that. But I just don't do it in the kind of gluttonous way that I used to do. And it feels really good. And Frank said, fair and balanced, 2 of my favorite words, right? Jack is currently in the menopause, so she's an absolute lunatic right now. It'll pass, Jack. It will pass. Don't let them give you too much, right, to change it. Try and go through it as much as you humanly can. I went through it bareback. I'm not saying that everybody can, but I'm very grateful that I did. Anyway, listen, I thank you, Ian. Thank you for being here. 100th edition, absolute. I'm so overwhelmed that we've got here, and thank you all very much for your support. And right, here's to the next 100, and I'm going to finish on a quote, because that's what we do around here, and that is, balance is not something you find, but something you create. Thank you very much, Jana Kingsford, for that. And I totally agree. Have a beautiful, beautiful weekend. Watch Only Cans on Sunday, and I will see you Monday morning. Thank you as ever to my glorious, gorgeous mods and you in the live chat, and anybody watching on playback or wherever you're watching. And hopefully from Monday, we can also be live streaming on Rumble as well, because I know that is a request. Love to you all, everybody. See you Monday. Take excellent care of yourself.